The cost of higher education in the United States has skyrocketed, leaving many families to make life-altering financial decisions. For Sarah Johnson, a first-generation college student, her parents took out a $400,000 mortgage to fund her education at an Ivy League university, believing it would open doors to a brighter future. However, years later, Sarah finds herself still struggling with debt, underemployment, and the weight of her parents' sacrifice. Was it all worth it? This article explores the emotional and financial toll of investing so heavily in education, questioning whether the dream of a prestigious degree really pays off in today's job market. Sarah Johnson grew up in a modest household in suburban Chicago. Her parents, Maria and James, were hardworking individuals who valued education above all else. They never had the financial freedom to pursue higher education themselves, but they always emphasized its importance, especially for Sarah. From a young age, Sarah excelled academically, receiving praise and encouragement from her teachers, who often told her she had the potential to go far in life. This belief that a good education would be the key to a better future became ingrained in Sarah and her parents. When Sarah was accepted into a prestigious Ivy League university, it was a moment of triumph for the entire family. However, the reality of tuition fees quickly hit them. The annual cost of attending the university was over $60,000, not including living expenses, books, and other fees. While Sarah had earned scholarships and grants, they were not nearly enough to cover the full cost. Her parents, despite their own financial limitations, were determined to give her this opportunity. They believed that investing in her education would pay off in the long run, helping Sarah achieve a level of success they could only dream of. In the face of this financial burden, Sarah's parents made the difficult decision to take on a $400,000 mortgage to cover the remaining cost of her education. At the time, it felt like the right choice. The idea of securing a degree from an Ivy League school seemed like the ultimate pathway to a bright future. Sarah would be able to network with top professionals, land a high-paying job, and eventually pay back the debt. Her parents saw it as an investment in their daughter's future, even if it meant putting their own financial stability at risk. Despite the weight of the decision, Sarah felt an immense sense of pride and gratitude. She entered college with high hopes, convinced that the sacrifices her parents made would lead to a rewarding career and a life free of financial worry. They had bet everything on her success, and she was determined to make it worth it. However, as the years went by, Sarah began to realize that the path she had envisioned wasn't as straightforward as she had imagined. The job market was tougher than expected, and the debt she carried grew heavier with each passing year. She found herself questioning whether the financial strain on her family was truly worth the pursuit of a degree, especially when the reality of the job market didn't seem to reflect the promises made by college recruiters. When Sarah first arrived at Ivy League University, she was filled with excitement and anticipation. She had dreamed of this moment for years, walking through the prestigious campus, surrounded by the brightest minds, and diving into a world of intellectual challenge. The glossy brochures had painted a picture of an ideal college life, stimulating classes, enriching social experiences, and an abundance of opportunities waiting to be seized. It all seemed so perfect. Her parents, too, had high hopes. They imagined Sarah would make lifelong connections, secure internships at top companies, and graduate with a job lined up before she even walked across the stage. However, reality hit harder than Sarah anticipated. The academic workload was brutal. The professors were brilliant, but their classes were often intimidating and impersonal. Instead of engaging discussions, many courses felt like a race to meet deadlines, with Sarah buried under piles of readings and assignments. The pressure to perform at the highest level was overwhelming, and she found herself struggling to keep up. The balance between school, extracurricular activities, and social life quickly became an impossible juggle. She had always excelled in high school, but now, surrounded by top-tier students, she felt inadequate at times. The social scene was another source of disappointment. Sarah had imagined herself becoming part of a close-knit community, forming lifelong friendships with people who shared her interests and aspirations. Instead, she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer size of the campus and the cliques that seemed to dominate every group. Most of her peers were from privileged backgrounds, and she often felt out of place, unable to relate to their experiences. Though she made some friends, she found that many of the relationships were transactional, tied to academic or career ambitions rather than genuine personal connections. Perhaps the most crushing realization was the stark difference between the promises made by university recruiters and the reality of the job market after graduation. The recruiters had painted a rosy picture: attend this university and you'll be set for life. But as Sarah neared the end of her time at university, she began to see that this was far from guaranteed. The internships she had worked so hard to secure didn't lead to the high-paying job offers she had expected. Graduates from prestigious universities were facing the same job market struggles as everyone else, and the competition was fierce. The city's cost of living was sky-high, and even with her degree, Sarah found herself applying for jobs she felt were beneath her potential. Despite the fact that she had a strong resume, including leadership roles in student organizations and impressive internships, the opportunities available to her weren't as lucrative or plentiful as she had hoped. And the student loan payments? They started looming over her even before graduation. With interest accumulating on the $400,000 loan her parents had taken out for her education, Sarah began to feel the weight of her choices. Her financial future seemed uncertain, and she couldn't shake the growing feeling that the debt she was about to inherit might be an anchor that would prevent her from truly thriving. The disconnect between the college experience she had imagined and the reality she faced left Sarah feeling disillusioned. The future that once seemed so bright was now clouded by mounting debt and professional uncertainty. And despite the academic achievements, internships, and accolades, she found herself questioning whether it had all been worth it. Was the degree, which seemed like the key to a successful future, really going to make a difference? Or was it just an expensive piece of paper? Was her family's sacrifice worth the struggle she now faced? When Sarah finally walked across the stage at graduation, there was a moment of triumph, but it felt bittersweet. The ceremony was beautiful, the applause was loud, and her parents beamed with pride. Yet, as she stood there in her cap and gown, clutching her diploma, she couldn't ignore the nagging sense of uncertainty that clouded the moment. She had just spent 4 years navigating a maze of grueling coursework, social pressures, and intense expectations. And now, with her degree in hand, she felt lost. The reality of life after graduation hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had entered college with the belief that her Ivy League degree would be a ticket to immediate success, a fast track to a high-paying job in a prestigious firm. But after months of job hunting, her optimism began to dwindle. The job market wasn't as welcoming as she had imagined. Despite graduating from a top university, the competition was fierce, and she found herself applying for jobs that didn't even align with her degree. In fact, she spent weeks, then months, sending out applications to positions in marketing, communications, and event planning, none of which required the deep knowledge she had gained during her studies. Sarah had always been told that her degree was an investment, that it would open doors and guarantee her a spot at the top of the career ladder. But those doors didn't seem to be opening. Many of her peers were facing the same grim reality: underpaid internships, temp jobs, and the constant pressure to network their way into opportunities that felt out of reach. Some of her friends, who had studied business or engineering, were finding positions right out of college, but they were often at smaller firms, earning less than expected, or working in jobs that didn't quite reflect the prestige of their degrees. To make matters worse, Sarah had no idea how to navigate the professional world. She had spent so much time focusing on academics, extracurriculars, and internships that she hadn't taken the time to develop essential soft skills like negotiation, time management in a professional setting, or even how to network effectively in a corporate environment. As her peers seemed to smoothly transition into their careers, Sarah was struggling just to land an interview. Every rejection email felt like a blow to her confidence, and with each passing day, The $400,000 debt that her parents had taken out for her education loomed larger and larger in her mind. At the same time, Sarah began to feel the weight of the financial burden her parents had taken on for her education. The reality of the $400,000 mortgage hit her with full force once she started receiving bills. She had always known about the loan, but now, with no job to show for her degree, it felt like an insurmountable obstacle. It wasn't just about her parents' sacrifice anymore, it was about her own future. The pressure to succeed was unbearable. How could she ever repay this debt? How could she justify the cost of her education when the outcome was so uncertain? Her parents had invested everything in her education. They had mortgaged their house, drained their savings, and worked tirelessly to fund Sarah's journey to the top. They had placed all their hopes in her success. Yet, as Sarah faced the stark reality of the job market, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She felt as if she were failing them, as if the dreams they had for her were slipping through her fingers. Their pride in her graduation soon turned into concern as they saw her struggle to find stability in a chaotic, unpredictable job market. The strain on Sarah's mental health began to show. She experienced anxiety, sleepless nights, and a deep sense of disillusionment. She had put so much stock in the idea that education was the key to success, but now, it seemed that it wasn't enough. The reality of the job market, combined with her growing debt, made her question the whole concept of higher education. Was it really worth it? Was the debt that her parents had accumulated truly justifiable if the career opportunities that followed didn't match the investment? As Sarah grappled with these questions, she realized that the road ahead was not going to be as straightforward as she had imagined. She had spent years chasing a dream, only to find that the dream wasn't the reality. As she slowly began to come to terms with the fact that she might not have the kind of career she had hoped for right out of the gate, she began to focus on finding a way forward, any way forward. Whether that meant taking a less glamorous job, considering a career shift, or even going back to school for a different field, Sarah knew that she had to find a way to make it work. But for now, the constant struggle to make ends meet and to deal with the weight of her parents' sacrifice remained a heavy burden on her shoulders. The emotional and financial toll of Sarah's situation began to spread beyond her own personal struggles, seeping into every corner of her family's life. Her parents, Karen and Tom, had always been her biggest supporters, believing deeply in the value of higher education. They had worked tirelessly to provide Sarah with every opportunity they could, even if it meant sacrificing their own financial security. When they decided to take out a $400,000 mortgage for her education, they did so with the belief that their daughter would graduate from college and quickly land a high-paying job that would not only pay off the debt, but also secure her future. But as months passed and Sarah faced rejection after rejection, Karen and Tom began to feel the weight of their decision. Karen, a nurse, and Tom, a small business owner, had always managed to keep things together, even in difficult times. But as the pressure mounted and Sarah's job prospects remained uncertain, they began to feel the strain on their own financial stability. They had already stretched their resources to the breaking point to finance Sarah's education, and now, with no immediate return on that investment, they were left wondering whether they had made a huge mistake. The constant worry over their own financial future, mixed with the concern for Sarah, created a tension that had never existed in their home before. While Sarah grappled with feelings of guilt and disillusionment, Karen and Tom were equally distressed. They watched as their daughter, once full of hope and ambition, became increasingly anxious and defeated. They saw how the pressure of the loan weighed on her, affecting her mental health and confidence. And they, too, felt the strain of their own sacrifices, as they had not only taken on the financial burden of the loan but also had to cope with their own feelings of failure. They had given everything for Sarah's future, and yet, their daughter was still struggling. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional weight of the situation. They felt like they had let Sarah down, even though they had done everything in their power to help her succeed. Tom often stayed up late at night, staring at the piles of bills, wondering how they were going to manage the mortgage payments. Karen found herself working extra shifts, trying to keep up with the mounting expenses, all while keeping up appearances of stability for Sarah. They had to keep the house running, keep food on the table, and maintain a semblance of normalcy for their daughter, who was already under so much stress. It was hard for them to admit to each other, but both were beginning to question whether they had made the right choice in taking on so much debt for their daughter's education. In many ways, Sarah's struggle had become their struggle, and the family dynamic began to shift. The once clear-cut roles of provider and nurturer were blurred. Karen and Tom, who had always been the rock of the family, now found themselves uncertain and fearful about the future. Their relationship, which had always been strong, began to show signs of strain as they navigated the fallout of the loan. Tom was often frustrated, feeling as though he had sacrificed so much for a future that now seemed so uncertain. Karen, on the other hand, tried to remain optimistic for Sarah's sake. But the exhaustion from her long shifts and the mental burden of the debt was taking its toll. Sarah could feel the tension in the house, and it made her feel even more helpless. She knew that her parents had put everything on the line for her education, and now they were paying the price. The guilt of knowing that their financial security had been compromised for her dream weighed heavily on her. It wasn't just her career that felt in limbo, it was the family's well-being. Every time she saw her parents look tired or worried, her heart sank. The dream of a successful future seemed increasingly out of reach, and the debt that she carried felt like a burden not just on her shoulders, but on the shoulders of everyone she loved. The emotional toll on the family became even more apparent when Karen and Tom started having private conversations about the future. They discussed the possibility of selling their house to pay off some of the mortgage or taking out additional loans to cover the current payments. The thought of losing their home, after everything they had worked for, was devastating, but they didn't know what else to do. Their financial situation, like Sarah's, was spiraling out of control. The more they thought about it, the more it became clear. They had invested so much in Sarah's future, but now the future they had imagined for her and for themselves was uncertain. This situation pushed the family into a deep period of reflection. They questioned the value of a college education in an ever-changing job market. Had it all been worth it? Would Sarah have been better off pursuing a different path? The questions lingered in their minds, unspoken but heavy. In the end, Karen and Tom knew that the only thing they could do was to continue supporting Sarah the best they could. But the truth was, they were just as lost as she was. As Sarah sat in the quiet of her bedroom, staring out the window, the question that had been weighing on her mind for months loomed larger than ever. Was the $400,000 mortgage worth it? It was a question that she had avoided, telling herself that things would get better, that a college degree would eventually pay off. But with each passing month, the mounting student loan debt and the lack of a clear career path made it harder to hold on to that optimism. From the perspective of her parents, Karen and Tom, the decision to take on such a massive loan for Sarah's education had always seemed like an investment in her future. They had watched countless others, family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers, reap the rewards of a college degree. For them, it was the logical step to ensure that Sarah would have every opportunity to succeed in a competitive world. They had believed, as many do, that the return on their investment would be guaranteed, a college graduate with a high-paying job and the financial freedom to live comfortably. But the reality, as they soon discovered, was far different from the expectations. For Sarah, the weight of the question was even heavier. She had worked hard in high school, achieved high marks, and made sacrifices to get into one of the best universities. The dream of securing a well-paying job after graduation was always within reach, or so she thought. But now, after sending out dozens of job applications, attending countless interviews, and facing a tough job market, Sarah found herself questioning whether all the sacrifices had been worth it. The degree that was supposed to open doors felt more like a piece of paper with no real-world value. It wasn't just the lack of job offers, it was the feeling of being lost. She had worked for years to earn a degree that now seemed to hold no weight in a world where employers were looking for more than just a college diploma. Her job search felt like a never-ending cycle of frustration, self-doubt, and disappointment. Sarah's parents, too, were now grappling with the worth of the investment they had made. They had taken out a mortgage, something they never thought they would do, in order to finance their daughter's education. But now, with their daughter struggling to find a job, they wondered if they had made the right choice. Was a degree truly worth the crushing financial burden they were now under? Were the promises of financial security and career advancement really worth the sleepless nights, the long hours, and the emotional toll they had all endured? Looking at the situation from a broader perspective, the question of whether the $400,000 mortgage was worth it goes beyond Sarah's personal journey. It speaks to a larger, systemic issue in the U.S. economy, the rising cost of higher education and the uncertain return on that investment. In a world where student loan debt has reached record levels and the job market is increasingly competitive, many students and their families are left questioning whether the financial sacrifice is worth it. For Sarah, and for countless others, the answer isn't as clear-cut as it once seemed. Sarah's personal struggles with finding a job and repaying her student loans have become emblematic of a larger issue facing young people today. While a college degree still holds value in many fields, it is no longer the golden ticket to financial success that it once was. With the skyrocketing cost of tuition, the average student loan debt, and the saturated job market, many graduates are finding themselves stuck in a financial quagmire. They've invested years of their lives and hundreds of thousands of dollars into a degree, only to face an uncertain future. Is it worth it? For Sarah, the answer remains unclear. She still holds on to hope that things will improve, that eventually, a job will come through and her education will prove valuable. But the uncertainty continues to weigh on her. She has learned that the dream of a college degree doesn't always guarantee the bright future that's promised. And while she understands that education can still open doors, she's realized that those doors don't always lead to the stability and financial freedom she was promised. For her parents, the question of whether the mortgage was worth it is one they struggle with every day. They've invested so much, not just financially, but emotionally, in Sarah's future. But as they continue to pay down the loan and watch Sarah navigate the post-graduation struggle, they find themselves wondering if the cost of education has become too great to bear. Ultimately, Sarah's story, like so many others, highlights a growing disillusionment with the traditional path to success. It's no longer enough to simply graduate from college and expect a high-paying job to follow. In the face of crushing student loan debt, a competitive job market, and a shifting economy, the question of whether education is truly worth the investment is one that more and more people are asking. For Sarah and her family, the answer is not easy to find, and it's a question they'll continue to grapple with long after the graduation ceremony. As Sarah reflects on her journey, she finds herself at a crossroads. The question of whether the $400,000 mortgage was worth it doesn't have an easy answer. Education, once thought to be a surefire path to success, has proven to be much more complex. Despite the sacrifices made by her parents and the hopes that once accompanied her degree, Sarah now faces an uncertain future, questioning whether the financial burden of higher education was truly worth the cost. Yet, in the midst of her struggles, there are glimmers of realization. The lessons she's learned about resilience, hard work, and the importance of adaptability cannot be measured in dollars and cents. Education may not always guarantee a perfect outcome, but it has given her the tools to keep moving forward, to continue learning, and to adapt to a world that is ever-changing. For Sarah and countless others in similar situations, the road ahead may be unclear, but it's not without value. The conversation about the cost of education, the rising student loan debt, and the uncertain return on that investment needs to continue. Only by acknowledging the challenges can we begin to find better solutions for future generations. For now, Sarah's journey is still unfolding, but the lessons learned from both success and struggle will ultimately shape her path.